The summer of 1887 brought the worst wildfire in living memory down from the Cascade ridgeline.
The valleys were choked with smoke, and the sky just burned this angry ember orange. Felt like the whole world was ending. Then a woman just walked right out of the firewall. She wasn't running, and she wasn't stumbling in a panic like you'd expect.
She was walking like someone who had picked a direction and was fully committed to it.
That was the first thing I noticed about her. I was standing out in the yard with a wet burlap sack, slapping at fence line embers. I just froze, completely caught off guard by the sight of her. She crossed the yard toward me, her face all smeared with ash. She didn't have a single thing in her hands. Nothing to her name except a little beaded cord tied around her left wrist. I told her she'd better come inside. She stopped and looked at me for a long moment, kind of measuring something invisible about me. Then, without a word, she stepped up onto the porch. I was 51 years old that summer. I had been working this valley for 19 years and doing it alone for the last 4. Ever since my wife, Margaret, passed away, the place had just been slowly fading. I didn't have much left to my name. Just a small herd of cattle, a couple of horses, and an old border collie named Trace. He was 11 years old and mostly just slept by the warm stove. And I had a cough. The doctor in town had listened to my chest that spring and gave me a timeline. I didn't tell a single living soul. I just kept my head down and kept working. I'd become a man who forgot how to be surprised by anything. I was just waiting for the world to finish with me. That's not the worst way to live, but it sure ain't living. Then she showed up and changed all that. I cleaned the burn on her arm with cool water and wrapped it in clean linen. She didn't say much, and I didn't ask. We just sat there in this quiet, comfortable peace. She slept for 18 hours straight. I gave her Margaret's old sewing room. When she finally came out, she didn't look beaten by the fire. She looked ready to steady. She moved through the house like a ghost, never touching what wasn't offered.
She'd just stand in the doorway and watch me.
It was a studious look, learning the shape of my life. By the second week, she started helping out.
She worked around that burn like it was just another chore.
And man, she had a way with the horses. You could tell she grew up riding.
Even old Trace took a shine to her.
That dog hadn't cared about anyone but me for years. Seeing him follow her around the dusty yard like a pup, it made me feel pretty good. Week 3, she started talking more about the ranch. One morning, she pointed out the cattle drifting north.
She said they were moving wrong.
Like the south water tank had gone foul.
I rode out to check, and she was dead right. The float valve was busted, and the water was practically mud. I fixed it up in the heat, just marveling at how she knew. When I got back, she was already brewing coffee exactly how I like it. Neither of us mentioned her being right. We just sat in this easy, comfortable silence. A silence I hadn't felt in years. By the 4th week, the smoke cleared enough for the sunsets to return. She sat on the porch steps in that amber light, turning the beaded cord on her wrist. Like a quiet prayer. She said in her mother's language, there's a word for this light. It means the world, after it's paid what it owed. Standing in the doorway, it hit me. I knew exactly how I felt. I told her it was a good word. She looked back over her shoulder and gave me this tiny, beautiful, almost smile.
It was too much.
I stepped back inside before she could read my face. September finally rolled in, bringing that first real rain we desperately needed. The fire danger dropped, and all that thick smoke just washed right out of the air. Everything outside turned this crazy, vivid green, like the whole valley was finally breathing again. One Tuesday evening, we were just sitting around the kitchen table. Old Trace was out cold by the stove, completely dead to the world. I poured us a couple glasses of Margaret's elderberry wine that I'd been saving for God knows what.
She held her glass with both hands, just staring at it for the longest time.
Then she set it down, looked me dead in the eye, and said she owed me the truth.
Not 'cause I asked, but because she figured I'd earned it by now.
Turns out, her father was Tidewalker, the chief of the Lower Chinook.
He wasn't just some ceremonial guy. He was the real deal, trying to keep his people together.
She grew up right by his side, learning how to read a room and negotiate when the deck was stacked against them.
She told me about this bad situation 3 years back down at the river. Some scared settlers got into a standoff with her people over the fishing grounds. In all the chaos, this little settler kid, maybe 9 years old, got left behind on the bank.
Saya found the poor kid out there alone in the dark, absolutely terrified.
She didn't wait around for permission or go ask her dad what to do.
She just kept him safe all night and walked him back to his folks at first light. But word got around, and the story got twisted by the time it reached her father.
It looked like she was making deals behind his back. Say in a natural American voice, but he had the survival of his whole tribe riding on his shoulders.
He couldn't afford to look weak.
So he had to make an impossible call and officially exile her.
It wasn't out of hate, it was just pure political survival. For 3 years, she just wandered, caught between worlds, until that fire pushed her right into my yard.
The kitchen got real quiet after that.
I looked at her and finally asked about that beaded cord she always wore.
She looked down at her wrist, just turning those beads over and over in her fingers. She told me her mother made it, and it was the only thing of her she had left.
She'd worn it since she was 7, right through the exile and straight through the fire. I just looked at her and told her I was real glad it held together.
I'd managed to hide the cough pretty well during those first few weeks. But once September rolled around and the smoke finally cleared out, it got a lot harder to ignore.
Saya was way too sharp to miss what was happening.
She didn't say anything right away, but I could feel her watching me when I had to stop and catch my breath. Instead of making a big deal out of it, she just started making this tea every morning. She'd go out to the edge of the property and find these specific roots and leaves.
I never asked what was in it, and she never offered to explain.
But it eased up my chest, so I just drank it without a fuss. Then one morning, she set the cup down, looked me dead in the eye, and asked how long I'd known. I'd told her the truth. Since March.
She sat down across from me and asked why I hadn't told a single soul.
I just looked at her and said there was nobody it would help to tell. She didn't blink. She just held my gaze with those dark, steady eyes of hers and said, "Well, there's someone now." I didn't say anything back right away. I just drank my tea and looked out the window at the mountains, thinking about what it meant to actually have someone again. I finally told her the doctor gave me 1 more winter. Maybe 2, if the second one was mild. She got real quiet for a second. Then she looked right at me and said we shouldn't waste this one. And for the first time in years, I felt something wake up inside me. I told her, no, I suppose we shouldn't. I'll just say it plain. Those next few weeks were the best of my life. We worked the ranch side by side as summer finally broke. The whole valley put on its October colors, and the mornings smelled like pine. She started teaching me things I'd never noticed before. Down by the creek, she showed me how to read the water moving over the stones. She said you could actually feel the pressure change when a storm was building over the mountains. She even taught me a few words in her mother's language. I stumbled over the pronunciation pretty bad at first, but she'd just correct me, real patient, until I got the rhythm of it right. In the evenings, she'd share stories her father had told her. Stories about the river, the land, and how the world really works. Say in a natural American voice, filled with quiet awe. To her people, The salmon and the cedar weren't just resources, they were relatives. Eventually, I found myself talking to her about Margaret. I hadn't spoken my wife's name out loud to another soul in almost 2 years. Letting it out felt like setting down a heavy weight I forgot I was carrying.
Saya just sat there and listened.
She didn't try to fix anything or offer up empty comfort. She just took it all in, holding my memories with this incredible, quiet respect. The next day, I finally opened up Margaret's sewing room. I pulled the covers off the furniture and let the light back in. It had been shut tight for 4 long years. Saya helped me go through her things. There was no drama to it, just a really practical kind of tenderness. She understood that the best way to honor the dead is to let their things live on. Say in a natural American voice, discovering something precious. Tucked away in a chest, we found a patchwork quilt Margaret had started. It was only half finished, but the stitching was beautiful. Saya ran her hand over the fabric, just taking in the colors. Over the next 3 nights, Saya actually finished the quilt herself. She smoothed it out on the bed and stepped back. She told me Margaret had good taste, and I knew right then they would have liked each other. Say in a natural American voice, reflective and calm. October faded out, and November hit us hard. The nights got bitter cold, dropping the first real snow up on the ridge. But Saya was right there through all of it. She was steady, helping me keep the cattle fed and my cough quiet. We never really put big words to what was happening between us. We didn't need to. The days just passed with this quiet kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. It was enough, honestly. More than enough. Then came a Wednesday in early November. I heard the horses before I saw them. 4 riders came up the ranch road, cutting through the morning quiet. Men in good coats on good horses, looking for something. The man leading them sat tall in his saddle. He wore a heavy wool coat and a single eagle feather. I didn't recognize him right away. But then I saw his face. He had the exact same dark, steady eyes as Saya. He stopped his horse right at my gate. He looked down at me, measuring me up like a man figuring out a problem. He didn't bother with a hello. He just looked at me and said he was told his daughter was here. Inside the house, Saya heard him. She went completely still. It was that same guarded quiet she had when she first walked out of the fire. Her fingers found that beaded cord on her wrist, just turning it over and over. I stood my ground at the fence. I told him a woman named Saya had been a guest here since August. I said it plain and simple. Like his showing up wasn't a threat, just a thing that was happening. He took that in, just staring at me for a long moment. I could see him calculating. Finally, he gave a short nod and asked to speak with her. I told him that was her choice to make, not mine. I went back inside. She was standing by the window, her face totally unreadable. She was trying so hard to keep it all locked down. I told her she didn't have to go out there. Whatever she decided, she was safe here. She looked at me, and her eyes were so bright. She said, "Elias, everything changes everything. That's the only honest thing about the world." She took a breath, let go of the cord, and walked out the door. I watched from the window as she walked to the gate. She stood in front of that massive horse, looking up. She had that same steady look from the day she arrived. They talked out there for a long time in the cold. I couldn't hear the words, and I didn't try to. Even old Trace just sat on the porch, watching them. When she finally came back inside, she didn't say a word. She just stood there in the middle of the kitchen. She was looking at everything like she was trying to memorize it. I asked her to tell me what was going on. She said her uncle had passed, and the council needed a liaison. Her father needed someone who could handle the territorymen. She told me him riding 4 days through the snow was his way of admitting he was wrong. Say in a natural American voice, understanding the unspoken, he didn't use those words, but that's what it meant. I asked her what she wanted to do.
She looked right at me and said she wanted to stay.
She wanted to finish the winter here and prove my doctor wrong just by being stubborn.
She wanted to hear me talk about Margaret again.
But her people needed her, and she couldn't just wish that away. I asked how long it would take, and she figured maybe until spring.
I told her spring isn't forever.
I told her to go do what she was built for, and come back when it was done. She walked over and took my face in her hands. She held me like she was making a promise she intended to keep. She packed up in 20 minutes, taking that old wool scarf of mine. At the door, she started giving me orders about the water tank and my tea. Then she said one last thing to me in her mother's language.
She walked back out to the yard. Say in a natural American voice. Her father reached down and pulled her up onto the horse right behind him.
As they turned to leave, she looked back at me one last time. I watched them ride out through the gate and head down toward the valley floor. They turned north toward the river, and just like that, they were gone. The quiet came rushing right back in. Old Trace wandered over and just sat right on my foot. He didn't make a fuss, just offered a little weight to keep me anchored. I stood there until the cold finally bit through my shirt, reminding me I still had work to do. Say in a natural American voice.
Sitting at that table, the house felt bigger and emptier than it had in months.
Her wine glass was still sitting up on the shelf, right where she left it.
Then I saw the paper she'd left on the table. I unfolded it, realizing it was that letter she'd been working on by lamplight all those evenings.
It was a guide to getting through the winter without her.
It was written entirely in her mother's language, just like I asked.
Say in a natural American voice, she'd drawn these perfect little pictures next to the words. A root, a leaf, even the exact fence post where the tea grew.
She mapped it all out for me. I stared at those drawings and realized something that hit me hard.
She wrote this before her father ever showed up at the date. She knew she'd have to leave eventually, and she wanted to make sure I'd be okay when she did.
Winter came down hard off the mountains that January, burying the whole ranch.
The road was completely snowed over and impassable for 3 straight weeks.
I was alone out there, in a way that sinks right into your bones. I spent those long, dark nights sitting by her oil lamp, studying her letter.
I drank that bitter tea she left me and slowly started figuring out the shapes of the words.
It gave me something to hold on to when the cold got too loud.
In February, old Trace finally passed on in the middle of the night.
He went quietly, curled up right next to the warmth of the stove. No fuss, no drama, just exactly the way he lived his whole life.
The next morning, I took a pickaxe out into the frozen yard to dig his grave. The ground was like solid rock, and it took me hours of swinging in the freezing air. But I didn't mind the work. It was the least I owed him.
Spring came late to the valley that year. It showed up grudgingly, and then all at once. By April, the whole valley floor turned this crazy, violent shade of green. It was like the land was making up for lost time.
I was out in the south pasture on a morning in early May, just checking the fence line after the snowmelt.
That's when I heard a horse coming down the ranch road.
I didn't run.
I'm not a man who runs.
I just walked to the gate at a measured pace. When you get to my age, you learn the difference between what you hope for and what actually shows up.
And you make your peace with it.
She came through the gate on a bay horse I didn't recognize. She looked right at me across the yard. She had those same dark, steady eyes from the fire season.
The winter hadn't worn her down at all.
Say in a natural American voice, with quiet admiration. If anything, she looked even more like herself. She told me the negotiations wrapped up in April. Her father asked her to stay on as the council's liaison.
I just looked at her and asked if that was what she wanted.
She said it was work she was suited for.
Work that mattered. She got down from the horse and just stood there in the yard.
She looked at the house and then over at the porch step where Trace used to sleep.
We didn't have to say anything about it.
She already knew.
Then she looked back at me and said she brought me something.
She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't the survival guide she left me back in November. This was something new. I took it and unfolded it. It was just one single sentence, written out in her mother's language. I'd spent the whole winter staring at the letters she left me by lamplight. So I stood there in the yard, and I read it. I looked up and said the words out loud. I totally messed up the pronunciation on the second word, but I tried. She gave me that little almost smile of hers and corrected me. So I took a breath and said it again. Right, this time. She nodded and told me it was better.
I told her I'd been practicing.
We just stood there, with the snow still up on the peaks and the whole valley turning green around us.
The morning light felt like an apology for the winter.
And we both knew it. She didn't come back to stay for good. Not in the way of permanence, anyway.
She came back the way the seasons do.
With gaps and distances.
She had a duty to her people, and she honored it. When she couldn't be there, she wrote. I'd sit at the table and read her letters. I learned her mother's language slowly,
with the imperfect fluency of an old man.
but I found out that late isn't the same as too late.
The doctor's timeline came and went.
And I was still here.
The illness didn't give up, but I learned something.
You can survive a hard winter if you've got a reason to.
And I finally had a reason.
She came for the last time in September.
2 years after that first fire.
The valley was warm and golden, offering up one last bit of generosity before the cold. She stayed because the time had finally come. When the end came, she was there, which was all I ever asked for. She held my hand
And spoke to me in her mother's language.
I understood more than I ever thought I could.
She told me what I meant to her.
She used that word that doesn't translate. The one she told me about on the porch.
The light after a fire.
The world after it's paid what it owed.
I want you to carry that with you.
This isn't a tragedy. It's not a loss. It was a debt the world settled at the end, with more generosity than I ever deserved.
She buried me on the ranch.
Right near where old Trace used to sleep.
She finished the paperwork, too.
Making sure the ranch wouldn't just fade away. She gave it a purpose, because she always had one.
Then she went back to the river. Back to the work.
But she still traveled that road back to the valley. Because it wasn't just a place she passed through anymore. It was a place she had arrived. There's a small marker in the yard now.
No dates. Just a name in 2 languages. I won't translate it for you, but if you learn to feel what moves under the words, you'll understand it.
And that's enough.
The ranch didn't just fade away after I was gone. It stood there, quiet and stubborn, holding its ground through the deep winter snows. Inside that kitchen, the stove eventually went cold, sure.
But the walls still held the echo of those quiet mornings we shared. Margaret's quilt stayed folded on the bed, a piece of the past stitched right into the present.
It was proof that nothing good is ever really lost.
Spring always comes back to the Klickitat Valley, no matter how hard the freeze.
The green pushes up through the dirt, violent and alive.
Up north at the Columbia, Saya kept doing the work she was built for. She held her people together, carrying the weight of it all with that same quiet grace.
I like to think she still turned that beaded cord on her wrist sometimes.
Just a small, silent reminder of a fire we both walked out of.
The years roll on, and the golden hour still hits the valley exactly the same way. It's that light that says the world has finally paid its debts.
That little wooden marker out in the yard weathered a lot of seasons.
The rain washed it, the sun baked it, but the words she carved never faded.
You don't need to know the translation to understand what it means.
You just gotta feel what's moving underneath the surface of things. Because, in the end, the best kind of love doesn't ask to be remembered by the whole world.
It just asks to be real.
Saya didn't just let the county swallow up the ranch. She filed the paperwork, fought the land claims, and locked it down. She made sure that piece of the valley stayed protected.
It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a sanctuary.
Up at the river, her work was pretty much nonstop.
She sat across from territorial officers using every trick her dad taught her.
She spoke their languages, read their faces, and held her ground.
She was fighting for her people's future, day in and day out.
Those documents she signed weren't just ink on paper.
They were an ironclad promise to the land itself.
She made sure the frontier's so-called progress couldn't touch Elias's home. That ranch was officially protected ground now.
Out in the south pasture, that old water tank still held strong.
Fond memory. Elias used to fix that float valve every winter.
Now, wild horses and elk stop by to drink when the creeks run dry. All that quiet care he put into the place was still keeping things alive.
Down by the creek, right below that second fence post, the wild herbs kept growing.
The exact same plants Saya drew in her letter were thriving in the mud.
It was like a living pharmacy, right there in the valley.
Just another piece of her ancestors' knowledge, quietly doing its thing. That 4-day ride between the river and the valley became her second home.
She rode it in the dead of summer and through the freezing autumn winds. She never really gave up one place for the other. She just became a woman who belonged to both and honored them equally.
Say in a natural American voice, though, the ranch house didn't stay empty forever. Say in a natural American voice, warm. Other Chinook families started using it as a safe spot when they traveled through. They'd light the stove, chop some wood, and rest up for the night.
They treated the place with a deep respect, keeping its spirit alive. Up on the shelf, that elderberry wine glass stayed exactly where Saya left it. Nobody who passed through ever dared to move it.
It just sat there, catching the morning light year after year.
A quiet little monument to the night everything changed for them.
That split-rail fence Elias fought to save from the fire?
It stood firm against the wind and the snow for decades.
You could still see the black scorch marks from the embers of '87.
It was built by a stubborn man, and it was definitely built to last. The valley holds their story in the dirt, the creeks, and the timber.
Out here, you don't need big monuments or loud speeches.
Say in a natural American voice, holding on to what matters. A love that was as quiet and as tough as the earth itself. She buried me on the ranch, in the yard, right in the ground I had worked for 19 years.
Close to where Trace used to sleep in the sun. There's a small grave marker on the ranch yard, if you know where to look. No dates.
She didn't put dates, and I wouldn't have wanted them.
Just a name, in 2 languages.
The English she had taught herself in the spaces between. And below it, in her mother's language.
This sentence she had read to me on a May morning, in a yard full of spring light.
I will not translate it.
Some sentences belong to the people they were said to.
And I'm not going to spend this one by passing it to the open air.
But if you go there and you read it, if you stand in that yard where the wind comes down off the ridge, you might just feel it for yourself. See, if you spend any time at all learning to feel for what moves under the surface of the words the world gives you, you will understand it. That is enough. I want you to carry that with you.
It wasn't a tragedy, and it wasn't a loss.
Just a debt the world settled, with more generosity than I had any right to expect.
This has been a story of fire, silence, and sacrifice.
A story about what a man with one season left is willing to fight for.
And what a woman is willing to build from the ashes.
It's about the kind of love that doesn't ask to be remembered.
It only asks to be real.
And out there in the Klickitat Valley, it was as real as the earth itself.
Thank you for riding with us.
Subscribe to Eagle Feather Stories for more moving tales from the American frontier.
Say in a natural American voice, friendly in closing. Until next time, keep listening to the wind. This was a story of fire, of silence, and of sacrifice.
It's about 2 people who thought they had absolutely nothing left to give. But somehow they found something beautiful in the ashes anyway.
It's the kind of love that doesn't ask to be remembered or written down in the history books. It only ever asked to be real. And for them, that was more than enough.
Say in a natural American voice, we're so glad you came along for the ride. There are so many more moving tales from the American frontier, just waiting to be told. Make sure to subscribe to Eagle Feather Stories and join our community. You won't want to miss our next ride into the past, because we've got plenty more trails to explore together.
Just a quick note that this content is made for entertainment purposes. We create dramatized and fictionalized interpretations of historical frontier life as a way of keeping those old legends alive and breathing. Say in a natural American voice, informative and steady. Our team uses AI voice, graphics, and scripting as modern storytelling tools. Say in a natural American voice, earnest and reassuring. These tools help us paint a really vivid picture of the past, but the heart of the story always comes from a human touch. Everything you see and hear is always human edited for emotional accuracy. We care deeply about cultural respect and originality because it's important to us that these stories honor the people who actually live them. We fully comply with YouTube's latest AI content policies across the board. No real persons are depicted or misrepresented in our videos, and we never reuse copyrighted visual materials without the proper licensing. We just want to be completely upfront with you about how we make the magic happen. Our ultimate goal is to give you the best, most respectful experience possible, because these frontier legends deserve to be told right.
Thank you so much for riding with us today.
We truly appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to tune in.
Until next time, keep the campfire burning.
Saya came back for the last time in September, 2 years after that first fire. The valley was offering itself up in a final generosity, like it knew what was coming.
When the time finally arrived, she was right there with me.
That was the only thing I had ever asked of it.
She held my hand and spoke to me in her mother's language.
I understood more of it than I ever thought possible for an old man who started from nothing.
She told me what I meant to her, using that one word that doesn't translate. The world after it has paid what it owed.
I want you to carry that with you.
It wasn't a tragedy, and it wasn't a loss. It was a debt the world settled with pure generosity.
She buried me right there on the ranch, in the ground I'd worked for 19 years.
She put me close to where old Trace used to sleep in the sun.
She finished all the paperwork through the tribal office, so the county couldn't take the land. She made sure the ranch was held legally, with a real purpose going forward. After that, she went back to the river and back to the work. But she still traveled that 4-day road in both directions. Because the valley wasn't just a place she was passing through anymore. There's a small grave marker in the yard now, if you know where to look.
No dates on it, just a name in 2 languages.
English and her mother's language right below it.
I'm not going to translate that sentence for you. But if you go there and you read it, and you've learned to feel what moves under the surface of things, you'll understand it.
You'll understand it. And honestly, after all the fire and all the silence, that is enough.